Hello, I'm back. Um, I've got some time to stream today, so I wanted to do that and return to talking about the Antitribu and the Black Hand and all that. Um, Last time we stopped, I think, right before the Tremere, so we'll pick up with the Tremere and chat about the Tremere Antitribu and all that. Um, Beyond that, I guess there's not much new having to do with me personally. Um, I just finished up on a writing project, at least a rough draft for that, and put in some notes, and hopefully that'll be out soon. Only a few notes here and there, so that'd be a pretty quick turnaround on the project overall. I think it took us longer to kind of jump through the hoops to get the contract signed actually than the writing itself, so that's great. Um, I'm confirmed at Gen Con as a part of their writers symposium, so that's good as well. Um, I forget the exact dates of Gen Con or whatnot, but I'll be there the whole convention, and I don't know exactly the panels I'll be on, but uh, I think last year I was on 12 panels, including two for Magpie. I don't know if Magpie is going to have the same kind of presence this year as they did last year, maybe. But this year, I think I'll be spending most of my time at the Writers Symposium, so expect I'll be doing somewhere between 6 to 10 panels. Um, we'll see. Hopefully, I get to spend more time with my friends than I did last year. Um, but who knows? You never know how these things go. Um, but yeah, I should be on or moderating some panels at Gen Con and, just doing the stuff with the Writer Symposium, which is, is pretty fun. It's a good part of, it's a fun part of Gen Con, I'd say. I enjoy the Writer Symposium, and I think it kind of gives back to the community as a whole, and also it does more for the convention than just being kind of a commercial operation, which is great. I think the convention. Hey there, Gord Whisper. Nice to see you. I'm good and I'm doing well. Hope you're fine as too. Um, yeah, so I think it does a lot for the convention. These writers symposium. I think the RPG business in general is pretty rough. If you don't have a mind for doing Kickstarters or administrative stuff or any kind of business, if you're just into the creative roles, if you just wish to be an artist or a writer, if you're not as interested in marketing or branding, it's a very tough space, um, and very easy to be taken advantage of. And those with any kind of business skills um, or administrative skills really have, I would say, kind of a competitive advantage in that space. And I think they should lean into those competitive advantages. I think if you have understanding of Kickstarters or how to, juggle a business or project management, that kind of thing, you should really use that in that space. Um, I personally have kind of avoided that, mostly because that's kind of what I did during my day job, and that's not really what I look for when I'm writing RPGs. I just want to write and create. I don't really want to get in the business of RPGs. But more and more, it seems like that's probably where I'll have to go if I stay in the RPG world. So we'll see. I've got a few ideas and concepts on some people I'm talking to see how to make that work. But we'll see. But for the most part, the Black Hand playing the Sabbat is what I'm mostly talking about on these streams. If I expand beyond that, well, we'll see. I do have a lot to talk about just in this book, obviously, and of course, we have two adventures that I can touch upon without spoiling. And perhaps I can talk about the Ivory Tower book beyond that, and upcoming projects and so forth. So, uh, content wise, I think I've got plenty to do before I kind of am scratching my head for what's next. Um, so the Black Hand, playing the Sabbat. We were just finishing up. I talked a little bit about Toreador and like the fact that I like Toreador in general, and that Torii and Antitribu are some of my favorite vampires. I think it's a very interesting clan. Um, I think the general portrayal of the Toreador is kind of very humane, effete, kind of heads in the clouds, or they're just strictly kind of posers with like talentless hacks that um, feed off of creatives, but have no creativity in themselves. Like those are all interesting concepts that you mostly would find in Anarch or especially Camarilla kind of games. But in the Sabbat, Toreador, and Antitribu, of course, kind of like flip the script. They are notoriously cruel and kind of fascinated by pain, discomfort, and kind of suffering, almost as a art. In the original second edition Player's Guide to the Sabbat, their clan weakness was actually changed. It was different than the standard Toreador clan weakness, which was the like you're entranced by beauty and aesthetics weakness, and it basically added on that they could also be entranced by like horror, pain, that kind of thing. That even discomfort was somehow beautiful to them, or even just abject ugliness was somehow beautiful for them. Um, I remember in at least one game we had a Toreador Antitribu. I think I was playing the Toreador Antitribu actually, and they were kind of obsessed with a Nosferatu character, and their real face and all that, and that was like an interesting role play moment for me and the other player. Um, yeah, yeah, that's from when I was playing a Toreador Antitribu. I wasn't 100% clear on that. It was a very long time ago, like high school RPG days. Um, so there's a lot of interesting play to be found with the Toreador in the Sabbat, especially um, this read through is more about how Toreadors see things as opposed to their role in the Sabbat, particularly. So it was more of a kind of like vibe based breakdown. When we get into the Tremere and all the sidebars that are in the Tremere thing, like sorry, I like sidebars. I try not to like overdo it with sidebars. I think I'm pretty good when it comes to sidebar. I think the longest sidebar I've ever put in a book, it was in the Second Inquisition. I wrote a sidebar so long that it basically had to be a full page instead of a sidebar on like torture and basically the sensitive portrayal of torture and what torture is about and like real world torture. And unfortunately, I happen to have academically studied torture, the corrosive effect of torture on democracies, torture's evasiveness and effectiveness in criminal justice and information gathering. Spoiler alert: it's basically useless, and all that. So I brought kind of a lot of my real world knowledge to that when I worked at the Center for International Human Rights. We of course, well, not famously, we wrote a amicus brief in Hamdan v. Rumsfeld, which is a famous, basically torture case that went before the Supreme Court. Hamdan eventually would win that case. He was tortured, waterboarded, and all that in Guantanamo Bay, and the rest. And of course, I've read a great deal about torture from everything from Algeria to the Middle East, especially Israel, obviously kind of the most notorious torturers in the region, as not that you would know that from our media portrayals, and so on. And I believe in the Second Inquisition, there's also some talk about Egyptian torture methods and all that. But that's neither here nor there. And of course, Guantanamo Bay, where we may still be torturing people to this day. Who knows? But torture was basically American policy for quite a long time, and so that time coincided with a lot of my academic research. So I wrote a very long sidebar on torture in games, specifically like torturing a vampire and all that. And I think it became like a whole page. Basically, they just changed it from a sidebar to a page splash. Um, but I think it was pretty important to put in there because I think throughout the book there's mentions of torture and we allude to torture. And I think there's even an NPC who's basically like a torturer specialist who specializes in like torturing vampires. And we talk about like methods that could be used to torture vampires. And I think we even use a play on words for waterboarding. I think we call it like sunboarding or something like that. I didn't really come up with that. So there was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek methodology in there throughout the book. So it was important that we inject some real world, a reality check, I guess, in there. So what was I saying? So hopefully not too many sidebars. Yeah, I think sidebars are fun. I love a good sidebar. Oh, I'm a little dusty in here, I guess. I love a good sidebar, and I hope these sidebars are useful. But more importantly, we talk about the Tremere and their kind of role in the Sabbat. This Tremere here in his first-person view, he basically says that this whole anti-tribu ethos, this kind of like dogma of being anti-tribu and clanless, is good for them because of how heavily stigmatized their clan is. Even more so in the Sabbat than anywhere else, because obviously the Tremere I kind of seen as like a foundational clan of the Camarilla, a clan that is very directly tied to their antediluvian, even if he's, technically like what I would call a false antediluvian, which is kind of a dichotomy that we really detail in the V5 Sabbat book. This like, well, not really detail. We touch upon it in the V5 Sabbat book, the idea of like a true antediluvian versus a false antediluvian and all that. And that basically these pretender antediluvians, the ones who like stole their power, are not really on the same level as like a vampire that has survived thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, just an unfathomable amount of time, like older than the pyramids. We're talking, it's pretty crazy when you think about it. So the Tremere obviously are very closely associated with their antediluvian. They were kind of created within the memory of vampires who's still walking about, and all that. So they're very much kind of a looked down upon, a despised clan within the Sabbat. So I wanted to touch upon that and the idea that the whole Antitribu dogma could be of use to them, and that it could be a way for them to kind of get ahead, because they could kind of strip themselves of their clan in a way. But also, the fact that they're embrace people very often who are obsessed with power, and that their clan's kind of strengths are really going to empower somebody who is like power hungry. Kind of a feedback loop there, that those who are power hungry are going to benefit a lot from the kind of tools that a Tremere vampire gets to play with. And it touches upon them being, few in number and all that, and a little bit about their, past qualms with the Lasombra and the Zemese and all that, and how with the shattered power structure and this anti-tribu dogma, they can finally move ahead. So that is partly touches upon kind of V5's overall thematic ethos of not limiting or restricting clan play strictly based on, not limiting the play of different clans and sects, and not limiting your role in a play group strictly based on like prejudices and stereotypes of those like clans, right? So if you want to play a Tremere who's like the pack priest, we didn't want to foreclose on that option. Those who are kind of like lore junkies or classic Sabbat players, they might not be down with that or interested in playing with that, and that's fine. But we didn't want to kind of reintroduce those stereotypes too heavily. We wanted to touch upon them. We wanted to recognize these things exist, and the role of the Tremere and like the kind of thematic play you can delve into with Tremere. It's kind of expected, as it were, the well-worn tracks, the grooves on the record player. But if you want to scratch the record, if you want to go off the track, if you want to explore undiscovered country, I think that's great, and it could be very interesting. Like the kind of struggles that a Tremere priest would have in a Sabbat pack would be very interesting. How often their authority would be challenged, how other packs would receive your pack, and all that. I think would be pretty cool. So we wanted to give some like cover, I guess, for players and STs that were interested in that kind of play, in those kind of characters. Other than that, excuse me. Little, like I said, a little dusty, a little dry in here. The heating is on because it's very chilly outside, so that kind of dries out the whole house, unfortunately. So beyond that, it's a pretty short POV overall. They mention Goretrix. I think in the POV they use they them pronouns in the POV. And then we mention House Goretrix. Of course, I believe this book came out before Cult of the Blood Gods, and definitely before Blood Sigils, which both I think kind of talk about House Goretrix. They kind of portray House Goretrix, I believe, as a more kind of like orthodox, old school Tremere clan, like the most Tremere of the Tremere kind of, which I feel doesn't really make much sense. Even if it's a house completely divorced from Goretrix, they're still using Goretrix's name, which would make zero sense. You'd want to use that name as opposed to the house that's actually called House Tremere, and that's led by Karl Schrecht, who's literally a former Justicar, pillar of the Camarilla, like a literal fascist. Like that is clearly kind of the Tremere. That's like the last vestiges of the Tremere. You don't need to like make anything up. Then Karna, who's obviously more kind of like anarch aligned and freeform, more kind of like witchy in the vibes. So Goretrix, obviously, they have the name, they have their assumed connections to Sabbat, all that. Obviously, this is a great place to put like the least ethical of all the Tremere, and those who may not really be interested in reforming the pyramid in any real way. Like, yeah, sure, if all the other houses agreed to submit to them and basically get absorbed by House Goretrix and recreate the pyramid with them completely on top, yeah, they would love that. That would be fantastic. But it would make no sense that they would have any interest in reforming the pyramid where they're just some small part of it. Like maybe their numbers are much greater now than they used to be, but there's very unlikely that there are, that the most powerful Tremere there are in House Goretrix. They probably have a handful of very powerful members, and the rest are probably younger. Yeah, I agree, Gord Whisper. Like, it kind of seems that whatever was written about House Goretrix in the official books really went out of their way to completely erase their Sabbat connections and vibes. They just wished to kind of use a name that had been talked about in the previous books and was a sure attention getter, without really doing any justice for the lore or the vibes or explaining them in an interesting way. So we wanted to kind of detail House Goretrix. Yeah, it's fair. There is a lot of that going on. There's kind of, I don't want to call it a cash grab or anything like that. I don't think that's the point. I think a lot of times you're constrained in how you can talk about things by your level of knowledge of the lore, which, to be honest, is probably the least problem. Most of the writers I see writing on official material, myself included, I hope, is we're very knowledgeable about lore stuff, and we've read the V5 books, or the ones that we're given as canon or that we personally own. Uh, and for the most part, that's the Cambria book, the Sabbat book, the Anarch book, the V5 core book, um, and that's basically, I think that's basically it. That's kind of what you're given as like the baseline core books, at least when I was involved, and of course, and the player's guide now, I guess. Hopefully, I don't know. I actually, when the last time I kind of got that packet, it was when writing, I think, on the player's guide, um, and so obviously that wasn't included, and the Sabbat book. Um, so our formulation of house score tricks, and I'll just read the sidebar. It's not very long, and I think it really kind of gets to it, and I can talk about it. So, house score tricks. After the Vienna Chantry was destroyed, the Tremere's pyramid splintered into numerous factions. These so-called houses lined up behind violent fascists like Karl Schreck. I love to just attach the word fascist to Karl Schreck. Sorry. And vapid backwater pretenders such as Karna. Now, this sidebar, because it's talking about house score tricks, uh, kind of breaks my usual rules about sidebars in that it's told in universe, like it's adding in this like kind of flavor commentary. So that this sidebar is a little different than most sidebars, but I felt it was warranted because I didn't want to like reveal. I didn't want to get behind the scenes on house score tricks. I just wanted to insert just a kind of a brief rundown of house score tricks without like having to put a whole section on it. And I felt like the Tremere Antitribu write-up was the best place to do it. Also, the Tremere write-up mentions score tricks and all that. So, the most secret of these is House Goretrix, named for the clan's greatest blood mage and most infamous traitor. Although some of its members are former Sabbat and progeny of Goretrix herself, first use of the female pronoun in the book. And yeah, as I said, this sidebar is kind of in-universe narrative. So yet again, take that with a grain of salt. But we get it. But I'll get into that too. House Goretrix is an independent faction of Tremere whose alliance with a number of the Seraphim is an open secret in the Black Hand. Unlike the other houses of Tremere, they have no interest in rebuilding the pyramid, but go out of their way to pit the other factions against each other to spoil any chance of reconciliation. And as you'll notice, no mention of House Ipsmis, just to carry on V5 tradition of completely forgetting that there is a fourth Tremere house and ignoring them and all that. I actually feel it's kind of a meme now. I plan to never put their name in writing ever. I think I'm not to throw any shade on them, but it's such a great meme to just ignore them that all the other Tremere basically don't even think about them. It's literally the Madman meme of the guy walking into the elevator to talk to Don Draper, and Don Draper, and he goes through a whole like spiel, and Don Draper's like, what? I don't even think about you at all. Like, who are you? And so that's kind of what I think. I guess we're running with that with House Ipsimus, and that's fine. I think that's fine. They're basically, from what I get of it, they're basically kind of like the Path of the Sun, but a Tremere house. Except the Path of the Sun is much more interesting, of course. In that they are basically, the Tremere Anarchs basically call themselves House Ipsimus, but it's more of kind of like a a gang sign, kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, as opposed to any kind of real hierarchy or real kind of like house in any real sense. And it's probably also why they picked such a ridiculous name, just to like make people say this ridiculous fucking name. Anyway, House Goretrix has dealings with both the Camry and the Sabbat, but the other Tremere houses seem willing to ignore their past treachery for some unknown reason. The Seraphim and Prissy of the Sabbat, on the other hand, are confident that Goretrix herself is still one of them and playing the Camry for fools. So, here we don't present House Goretrix as strictly a Sabbat house, right? In V5, the Sabbat is basically portrayed as, super inhuman and secretive, this like kind of like terrorist cell faction. You can't reason with them, all this stuff. Obviously, that's not fully the case. But that carries over in that if House Goretrix was openly aligned with the Sabbat, they would also fall under all that propaganda, probably. And it would be harder for them to straddle the line as they do. So they're kind of almost like a mercenary house of Tremere. that are willing to work with both the Sabbat on the down low and the Camarilla. They pay lip service to this. Oh, really need to figure out how to reconstruct the pyramid, but they really have no interest in that. While Karna and Shrek seem pretty actually interested in that. Karna wants some kind of reforms. Like I said, they're kind of this like liberal Wiccan vibe, even though Karna herself is seems very revolutionary in mindset. The house itself seems more interested in some kind of reform, while House Tremere, that run by Carl Schreck, is obviously no. Let's just go back to the way things were. Like, we'll pick new people in charge. Like, we'll let you have like a vote, but basically, we're just going to rebuild the pyramid from the crumbled blocks lying around on the floor. And it's going to basically be the same as it was, as best as we can make it. So they're kind of the status quo. And Goratrix, I felt, was best portrayed, House Goratrix, as playing both sides against the middle. And if the pyramid is to be reformed, it'll be solely in their image. There will be no like compromises or anything like that. And if it can't be that way, then they're happy for it to be broken. They're happy to grow their own power and seek their own interests and all that. And there is a House Goratrix lore sheet that kind of plays around with that. If I remember correctly, it is not a Sabbat-specific lore sheet, but the higher levels of the lore sheet are Sabbat only, if I remember correctly. I'll check the lore sheet after this, after I go through the Goratrix pronouns. Sidebar. So, well, actually, no, I'll do that right now. Why don't I check the... why don't I check the, excuse me, the lore sheet now. So the, whoops, I don't want that. So the House Goratrix lore sheet, chapter 4, lore sheets, and it's the second lore sheet, yeah. So these early lore sheets, the lore sheets are kind of ordered in the book. So the first few lore sheets are not necessarily Sabbat specific, like Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand lore sheet. Is basically anybody can get the 30 Secrets of the Black Hand lore sheet, and of course we named it in respect to the classic book, the House Goratrix, and even the Sasha Vikos lore sheet are not Sabbat specific, as you can see, though some levels of them are. So the same thing is here with the House Goratrix. As you can see, level 3 and level 5 are both limited. Level 3 is Tremere characters only, because it's basically the you're related to Goratrix advantage. And level 5 is Sabbat only, because it's basically the you have political connections to Goratrix advantage. And here, yet again, the she, they pronouns are used for Goratrix. And, I won't go through each one of the advantages, but the advantages basically all are about their interest in, like, secret occult lore, and their interest, and basically the way they kind of play both sides and their connections. Only the 5th level is like a super Sabbat focused advantage, and so on, and kind of introduces some interesting roleplay options, as well as basically giving Goratrix as a Malwa to you, a mentor. The 4th level, I think, is the most interesting one. So the house declares itself as independent, so on and so forth. They deny that Goratrix, the Methuselah, holds any sway over the house, and basically talks about how the Camarilla court them aggressively to basically reform the pyramid, and basically to work with the rival houses. And it basically can like super boost like projects and stuff like that. It basically can put a lot of resources and background dots at your disposal, um, and all that, and puts you kind of in debt with the house. So it kind of shows that they're um, willing to play ball with anyone and work with anyone, and basically get favors and boons and all that. And the Tremere focused one is basically about how the blood of Goretrix are like the preeminent ritualists of the Tremere. And for that, is say basically so you wield blood magic with unparalleled ease, gain 2 automatic successes on any roll necessary for casting a blood sorcery ritual. In addition to the usual Tremere clan bane, you bear a mystical brand that others can perceive with the Auspex power Sense the Unseen, with a difficulty of 7 minus your bane severity. So it gives them the OG Tremere Antitribu clan weakness, which is the mystical brand that you can see with Sense the Unseen. And, of course, it ties it in with their bane severity, as all clan weaknesses should be linked to bane severity. So I think the power of basically the 2 automatic successes for blood sorcery rituals, which is pretty goddamn good, is well balanced with that weakness. It's Tremere characters only. I should, I guess, put a note in there now that I think of it, that you can't take this if you've already taken a I'm related to so and so merit or advantage. So I guess that's the only thing missing. If I was to rewrite it now or edit it, I guess I would put in a line basically saying that it is a like bloodline advantage, that you're only getting this advantage if you're basically actually related to Goretrix. And of course, that is a nod to the idea that not all Tremere Antitribu are destroyed, right? So I feel there's a bit of kind of an assumed knowledge in Vampire the Masquerade that all the Tremere Antitribu were destroyed, like they all gathered in Mexico City. And I don't know if you've ever gone to a family reunion or had a company meeting with like your boss or whatever, where you knew you were going to get fired. Right? Would you go to that meeting? Okay? Or if like you knew the like touchy uncle was going to be at the family reunion, like maybe you'd skip that. Right? These are Tremere. Like if anybody's going to figure out ways how to like get out of it, or figure out ways to skip the meeting, or figure out ways not to like be mystically called, whatever, it's going to be them. So some of them might have been in torpor during that ritual that killed them all, supposedly, right? Some of them may have been captured, indisposed, who knows what, mystically imprisoned. Well, unfortunately at this point, there was a lot of heavy-handed meta plot, because there was obviously a switchover in how V5 was going to be run and who was running it. And very clearly, there were some favorites and some, redheaded stepchildren. The Tremere Antitribu, the Ravnos, and I would say the Sabbat as a whole were clearly there was not a lot of love for them with, the new regime. And they really got the shitty end of the stick in Revised, I would say, as compared to their portrayals in 2E. I'm not quite sure why that was. And, of course, there were some winners, the Giovanni, the Cappadocians, and all that. They really, more the Giovanni, actually. Like, the Giovanni got a whole set of adventures somehow, the Giovanni Chronicles, which was kind of random. The profile of Zemisei actually went up incredibly. I think kind of because their Dark Ages portrayal, the Zemisei Dark Ages portrayal, was so powerful and resonant with the community that there was kind of people wanted to see more of them in the modern day. But really the Giovanni, I'd say, were the biggest winners in Revised. Their profile, their power set was so incredibly expanded. It was really something else. I think there were 3 Giovanni clan books that came out, each one thicker than the last. I don't know. I mean, I can't complain. I actually love Giovanni. I think they're fantastic. Some of my favorite LARP characters were Giovanni's, actually. Some of my favorite NPCs were Giovanni. A very interesting clan, personally. The Giovanni Chronicle sets were pretty good. It's just a weird was just like it was strange to kind of lift them up almost randomly, and tell a story spanning several centuries, centered around them. And then with the Zemese, they tried to do something similar with the Transylvania Chronicles, but I believe those basically just kind of got wrapped into the Giovanni Chronicles, really. Um, but that's neither here nor there. Um, Basically, I wanted to talk about how if you wanted to play a Tremere Antitribu who had survived the like purge, that's perfectly fine. Um, and I wanted to muddy this concept that, Goretrix was gone and being possessed by Tremere and all that stuff. That's all heavy-handed meta plot garbage that really I don't really give a shit about. If you want to use it in your game, that's perfectly fine. How you're going to use it in your game, I don't know. Is like, Tremere going to show up in your chronicle? Okay, like if you want to do that, for me that kind of has the same feel as like Kane showing up in your game in a meaningful way. It's really what people had a big issue with like Berlin by Night, with this kind of like, what if Kane showed up, kind of concept. I think that's an interesting thought exercise. How it would work in a game is much more difficult. So I think that would take a lot of thought, and a lot of work. But more interestingly, I would say that, like even Ravnos is a good example. Like the antediluvian being destroyed by like lasers is such a, or it's like satellite lasers, and like the power of kung fu, is such a, world of darkness kind of trope of kind of like Stephen King, in I believe Dance Macabre or On Writing, said if all else fails, go for the gross out, which is basically if you really can't think of how to wrap up a scene, if you really can't think of what's next, for how a story is going, then gross them out. Go for something like crazy and over the top, like make someone's face explode in maggots, whatever. Like, gross them out. So it seemed that was basically, they took Stephen King's advice, but like if in this case, if all else fails, go for the clown shoes. Basically make up something so ridiculous, over the top, and like kind of buffoonish, that nobody can really argue with it. So yeah, shooting an antediluvian with space lasers while they have a kung fu fight, was, not very well thought out. And then the fact that it had kind of a chain reaction against the whole clan. Basically, the Ravnos clan obviously was problematic because of its portrayal of, Romani people. I guess, and basically the constant use of the slur word, for that people, in identifying them, so that the Ravnos basically became identified with the slur, and the fact that they basically used every negative stereotype of that people, in their portrayal of the Ravnos, and kind of and they tried to move away with it by basically ethnicizing the Ravnos as this kind of, I guess, Indian flavored or Desi flavored clan with like a caste system, and their Romani roots were kind of diluted that way. But in the end, I guess they really couldn't figure out a way how to do it. They didn't have the interest or the reason. So they decided to genocide the clan, which is incredibly problematic when you're basically being lambasted for your poor portrayals of a people who, have encountered genocide in the past in the real world. So that was terrible. That was very badly done, and kind of a stain on the whole brand and line, I'd say. I would say the Week of Nightmares lore sheet, I feel, one thing that it kind of does right, is like the 5th level dot where you have like the blood of Zarathustra, or however you pronounce it, as a potential advantage. So I think that's great because it kind of hints at the fact that he's not dead. That this was, I mean, you're talking about a trickster lord, a lord of illusions, all that. And you're talking about a story that is so over the top and ridiculous that it could only be a lie. It could only be a trick. Like if he was destroyed, why would his blood be lying around? Mostly in my headcanon, I think, perhaps it was a Methuselah. not the antediluvian itself. Because the idea that an antediluvian would like wake up and go on a rampage just seems kind of almost kaiju Godzilla-esque. Really, the most kind of least imaginative way I could think of an antediluvian rising would be like that he would actually Godzilla stomp through a city. So, yeah, I agree. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate in that regard. But there's the House Goretrix lore sheet. Now, I'll get back to talking about the Tremere. I believe I can now talk about the Goretrix pronouns sidebar in a definitive way. Now that I've talked about the lore sheet and all that stuff and kind of frame the situation. So this sidebar was actually added to the book after we had a sensitivity reader go through it, after we, as writers, myself specifically, got feedback from the community about how basically our playing with Goretrix's pronouns was perceived. I believe there was at least one very bad faith review that basically tried to tar us as like transphobic somehow, which is obviously totally ridiculous. I confronted that head on. I hired the sensitivity reader to go through it, who, you know, is very, I guess, very versed in trans rights and those issues, if you know the sensitivity reader at all, and LGBTQ, you know, queer issues and all that, and is very well versed in vampire. So I felt very comfortable with them. We'd worked together on other Vampire the Masquerade projects. I felt they gave us very good feedback, which we accepted all of their feedback whole cloth and made the changes they recommended. And I added this sidebar, which is actually kind of taken from a Twitter thread I made addressing this issue, that obviously myself and all the writers are for trans rights 100% without any qualifications or qualms. We're very pro-queer and pro-LGBT as well, and that our portrayal of Goretrix in no way was intended to be, any kind of trans representation. I can read the sidebar very quickly and then give my thoughts beyond what I was thinking about when we made this change. So Goretrix's pronouns. The most famous Tremere, other than Tremere, Goretrix had to be in the Black Hand playing the Sabbat, but some of their legacy content was based on problematic stereotypes. We had to give players and storytellers permission to reimagine Goretrix without erasing their identity. So this is something I've become very aware of as a writer and player. The more I have connected with the community, one of the benefits of social media, one of the benefits of LARP, is I can basically connect with the community on a much larger scale than I ever could as an individual writer. And one thing I really hit upon was that the vampire community was very attached to lore and metaplot. They really had a hard time kind of breaking the rules, I guess, and like stepping out of lore and metaplot. It was really kind of confusing to me. But I could see that as an author, I just had a different perspective. Since I literally was writing these worlds and these characters and this lore and generating it from my mind, no one was giving me directions when I, invented these things. I had a completely different perspective, right? I saw these as all, malleable things, that there was no problem rewriting things, that there was no issue with if you wanted to go a different way. And while I believe there has to be common ground so that we all know we're playing the same game, while I believe that there are like touchstones and pillars that are thematic things, tropes and whatnot, if you will, that beyond that, when it comes to just like the history and lore and characters of the world, which are not what make the game particularly, at least not the whole of it, that is all mutable. That the reason we have these narrators who are inconsistent, these narrators you can't trust fully, is to basically give you permission to do what you want, to use these characters, use these themes, use these story elements, these historical lore in any way you want. Change it as you will. But that was a perception I found to be just lacking in the community in general, which was a bit surprising to me. So when we were writing this book, one thing I wanted to do is to challenge certain pieces of lore and mythology and takes that I found to be prevalent in a way to give permission to storytellers and players to do what they wanted. So it's okay if you read something in this book and go, no, it's not like that. It's like this. Great. You're disagreeing with me, which is fine. So I hope you take that stance and that perspective to all the other books too. If you read something and it sucks, in your opinion, then don't do that. Change it, break it, use it in a different way. I think that's great. And it can be a twist for your players who may be expecting something else. If they are filled with the lore of Tremere in one way, and then have to confront the reality in your game of Tremere being a completely different way, then that's great. Like in this book, it basically puts forward the idea that Salubri and Tremere colluded to eradicate the Salubri clan. That the Tremere persecution of the Salubri was actually a plot between the elders of the Salubri and Tremere. Like, that's literally in this book. It's not spelled out that way in some cases, but if you look at the Seraphim, if you look at the Salubri right up here in the Antitribu section, and if you look at the Seraphim Jiangbei Moon, here she is, who's featured in the official Gehenna War book. her name and her whole shtick and her host is all in that book. Official, V5 official, love it. So if you look Jiangbei Moon, right here, she's basically telling you that the Salubri and Tremere elders colluded to destroy my clan, and I'm gonna take them out. She's not just hunting Tremere, she's hunting other Salubris specifically. She wants to eat Salubri Methuselahs because she feels they're traitors. She believes it. So that kind of breaks from the lore, but I think it's fucking awesome. So it's in the book, and if people want to use it, they can. And if they don't want to use it, that's fine too. And of course, that is kind of that, and also of course that framing and that conspiracy is now in the Gehenna War book. You have a Sabbat faction in the Gehenna War book called Moon's Army. Not named after me, after Jiang. Obviously I'm Moon. Named after Jiangbei Moon, the Seraphim, who are hunting Tremere and Salubri, using their prophetic visions and powers of Auspex and literal digging machines, to dig up Methuselahs and eat them. So that I feel is an interesting twist that goes against the portrayed lore. Basically all the Dark Ages books, which is like what was happening at the time, right? Basically portrays Salubri strictly as victims. There's no, conspiracy. Maybe Salubri himself, it's implied, knew he was going to be killed and did nothing to prevent it, right? But it kind of portrays him in a martyr, as either a fool, a martyr, or okay, you may kill me, but in the end I will win kind of way. Which, of course, makes Tremere's destruction of Goretrix even more nonsensical. Like, if Tremere's body is possessed by Saulot, so Tremere had to jump in Goretrix's body and all that. It's kind of like, I don't know. That's very soap opera drama. Like, it was my evil twin. I woke up from a coma. Not really my thing, but I guess in some Chronicles it could be fun if you just played Vampire the Masquerade, but it's Days of Our Lives. That could actually be a fun game, now that I think of it. So, but that's not really how I'd want to write core Vampire. So that's kind of beyond the point of the pronouns, but part of the idea behind changing Goretrix to she, they was this confronting lore and meta plot, as we did throughout this book, but not the core reason, but one of the reasons. So, using she, they pronouns for Goretrix was a creative decision that had to do with the ambiguous nature of Goretrix's gender as presented in the second edition of the Sabbat and the first edition Tremere clan book. We took, actually, technically there is no first edition Tremere clan book. I just meant the first printing of the Tremere clan book, but that's fine. We took a V5 approach with this book, and that meant some lore, especially with clan novels and Dark Ages books, were reinterpreted or left in the shadows. Like, if you've ever read House of Tremere, or World of Darkness France. It's just titled France, which is, as far as I know, basically non-canon, but who knows? It's disappeared. Or the book World of Darkness, or A World of Darkness, or A New World of Darkness. Like, no one really references those books as lore or metaplot anymore, especially A World of Darkness. And A, they're dated. B, they have lots of problematic material. And in many cases, like with House of Tremere, they kind of present this very skewed viewpoint. Like, House of Tremere basically presents it as if the Tremere run everything. They run the Camarilla. They're the most powerful clan. Like, basically, they just run this shit. They're these puppet masters. And what's the point of even, like, playing something other than Tremere? It's kind of a hilarious book in that regard. It's kind of it's like a clan book. It's like a super clan book, almost. And in some of the novels and in that book and others, like Goretrix is really presented, I personally feel, in a very problematic way, in a very homophobic way, is my personal interpretation. I don't know if that was the author's intent to be, homophobic, but there are a lot of homophobic tropes in there, and kind of a bit of biphobia too, because the novels kind of present him, I guess, as what would we call a pansexual now. And he's basically punished for his sexuality, I guess. But also his sexuality is presented as not really a part of his identity, but as a way for him to gain power, right? It's not really about his sexuality. It's that he's willing to do anything to gain power, and if that means manipulating people for sex or whatever, or showing affection to people, then so be it. But in the clan books of Tremere, he's more presented as like a spurned lover, or I should say they're more presented as a spurned lover. I believe they might use he pronouns in that book, but the naming convention's completely wrong for that, which I get into that. So in the case of the Goretrix, some books presented them as a bisexual or gay character who was deeply misogynistic and keen on pursuing powerful men or men they had power over. Goretrix is castrated in a ritual, eventually betrays their lovers and friends to the Sabbat, and is ultimately possessed by their old lover master. So I break down all the old lore, and I hope you can see how kind of problematic and the issues this all presents, and why we weren't really interested in incorporating any of that, and how we basically wanted to challenge their presentation in such a core way that it questions all of that lore, and basically kind of playing with their gender identity seemed like a very, I guess, very clean way to do that. So that didn't fit into our vision for the character, and we didn't want to delve into the weeds of those legacy books, for obvious reasons. In the Black Hand playing the Sabbat, Goretrix's gender is not disclosed, but their name does imply a character that prefers feminine presentation, and the rest we leave to the players and storytellers. Perhaps the old stories are crude propaganda concocted by the conservative and patriarchal Tremere? Question mark. So perhaps Goretrix was feminine, or was a woman, or presented in a feminine way, and that was perceived to be threatening to the Tremere, who are almost, I don't know, 90% male. I think there are 2 women counselors presented in the book in total. I think there's only one powerful, like really powerful feminine Tremere counselor in the book. Obviously scattered out throughout the books, there, I'm sure a mix of genders between them. But the Tremere is very much presented as a patriarchal organization, very male-oriented. Tremere himself, obviously, is presented as a kind of almost crude patriarch. And that kind of makes sense. That is definitely common in esoteric circles, especially the older ones, that there was kind of this, patriarchal, male-dominated vibe and ethos within those circles. It's unfortunately very common, especially with the legacy organizations. I don't know if it's like that today. I'm not involved with any of that stuff. So who knows? But historically, definitely sure. So it kind of makes sense that the Tremere, as this like order of mages, basically this esoteric society, would continue that on. Because obviously, as vampires, they would kind of be locked in. They'd be stultified. They would not be growing in any real way. Even Etrius, the kind of like kindest, Etrius, the good Tremere, is also presented as patriarchal, and obviously as Goratrix's kind of main op, Etrius seemed very happy to leverage Goratrix's, identity against them to gain power and political sway within the Tremere. So I hope that explains some of that and clears that up. Obviously there are always going to be bad faith actors who are going to present this in a negative light, and that's fine. There's not anything I can do about that. I've said my piece, and I feel I've been pretty definitive about it. I prefer Goratrix, she, they, personally, but you can do whatever you want in your games. I also think that the kind of old presentations of Goratrix really just need to be left in the dust and ignored. I don't think anybody needs to go back and edit those books or excise them or write any kind of apologia for them now or kind of retcon all that stuff. That's really not necessary. I feel that players and storytellers just need permission to leave all that problematic stuff behind. Like, forget about it, You don't need to use those old interpretations of the Ravnos. You don't need to use kind of homophobic presentations against Goratrix and all the rest. That's, if that has no value in your games, and it probably doesn't, then just leave it behind. I don't think you need to have any conflicted feelings about it. You don't need to keep all the old stuff just because it's old stuff. So that was a lot. I have some more time, so I'm going to continue, and I'm open to any questions or anything like that. I'm actually going to take a quick break. I'm actually expecting a plumber soon, so I'm kind of checking my thing. But I'm going to take a quick break now, because I need to get a glass of water because I'm parched. I'll be right back. Okay, I drank some water. I'm feeling better. All right, I can talk now. I'm no longer choking on dust. One of the problems with the older place in winter is, when the heating is on, the place just dries up like, I don't know. Just dries up. So what we talk about next is Zemisei. With the Zemisei, as part of this kind of Antitribu concept, is basically just they re-emphasize that they're basically like the heart and soul of the Sabbat, especially now that parts of the Lasombra clan have basically been outed as traitors, as they were more interested in power than, the ethos, theology, and all that of the Sabbat. Which on some level, I want to talk about that a little bit. Perhaps I mentioned it when I spoke about the Alhambra, but definitely the Zemese portrayal doubles down on this. Is this idea, as I've talked about before, how different editions of the game, or different time periods of the game, I should say, not necessarily even editions actually, because some of this has crossed editions, and I don't really want to get into any kind of edition war. That's not really useful. But I'd say starting around revised, as I mentioned before, there's this kind of like the Sabbat as hypocrites, like they are the hypocrite sect. That basically they talk a lot about freedom and all that, but they enslave people with the blood bond. They talk about destroying the elders, but they're run by elders. They talk about destroying the Antediluvians, but they spend all their time basically squabbling over, ideological differences, and basically just, squaring off with the Camarilla over turf. That they're doing very little to actually pursue the Antediluvians, right? So that was kind of the way they were portrayed, and part of that was to kind of soften their playability. Basically after second edition, it was like, okay, you want to play Sabbat, we put out all this rules to play Sabbat, but they're too rough and tumble. We've got to kind of smooth over their rough edges and make them more palatable. So this kind of, how do we do that? Well, they're hypocrites, so in actuality, they're basically just like the Camarilla. They just say all this stuff. So all the paths were watered down, and you couldn't kill humans anymore, and all that stuff. And oh, by the way, half the Sabbat are actually on humanity, and so on. So this write-up in the Zemese point of view actually kind of points to that meta commentary, and basically puts it on the Alhambra. It basically saying that the Alhambra were the hypocrites, that under the Alhambra rule, the Sabbat basically became the Camarilla light, and more interested in kind of these like night-to-night squabbles as opposed to their true purpose. That they were corrupted by their wish to seek more power individually, and they weren't using that power to achieve systemic goals. They were using that power for personal gain. They were individually corrupted. And so now that those Alhambra are gone, that the Sabbat in some way has been like purified. They don't say all Alhambra. I mean, obviously there's still Alhambra in the Sabbat and all that. Their role as like the preeminent clan of the Sabbat is obviously greatly diminished. And of course, this Zemese point of view kind of crows about the fact that, Zemese undefeated, Zemese superior, as it were. Even though some would say that they're, uncharismatic, as Rumble would say. So they say they keep the faith. Zemese, Antitribu, clanless, Cainites, they strip themselves of everything unnecessary. The fat of our souls trim clean in service and absolution to Cain. Neither father nor mother. We await Cain the king, a god to rule over a new world. If only we have the faith to fashion it from our flesh and our souls. So really, he take the Zemese point of view here, and this isn't a clan-wide point of view. It's meant to be a single individual Zemese to kind of give you a thought experiment, something for character creation and story development. Takes this very kind of high-minded approach. Move on to the Ventru and the Thin Bloods. This is actually the last part of the Antitribu, and after I do that, I can end the stream probably, or take some questions, and that way I'll have a kind of complete videos about the Antitribu in just 2 videos, which is fantastic. I spent a lot of time on the Tremere, but that's fine. I mean, I think that's the way to go. So the Ventru and the Thin Bloods, there isn't a whole hell of a lot to say. I will say that Ventru have always had interesting write-ups in the Sabbat. They haven't really delved deep into it. They're very much kind of presented as like the Bruja of the Sabbat. Like they're the rabble rousers and the iconoclasts. They're the guys who are most likely to be loyalists. And when I say loyalist, I mean in the Sabbat sense. Classically, by the factions, the loyalist Sabbats are the ones who are basically like the, I don't want to say libertarians, but kind of that's the thing to go for, I guess, in some mindset, that they're very wedded to the concept of freedom and the anarch kind of underpinnings of the Sabbat. And so they really don't like any kind of hierarchy or status quibbles or debts or obligations or any of that crap. Like, they're here to do Sabbat things, to get their own, to achieve their own personal ambitions, obviously, but more their personal religious ambitions, their kind of esoteric theological enrichment, but also to be free. They're not here to take orders from a bishop or an archbishop. They don't give a shit about, like, all that stuff. That's kind of the loyalist point of view, and that basically saying fuck you to a leader is really their whole ethos. So the Ventru are always kind of presented as in the forefront of that, because obviously Ventru in the Sabbat would be a kind of looked down upon. Like, their clan is obviously the preeminent Camarilla clan, really seen as kind of like, just abject servants of the antediluvians and like blowhards. They may be like hard to put down, but that just makes them more arrogant. So you could see how a Venture in the Sabbat would really kind of have to go for kind of the most extreme positions to prove that they're real, that they're not just a fake Sabbat, as it were. So for this, we kind of delve into legacy and how Venture are often interested in like lineage and what that kind of point of view could look like in the Sabbat and what it means overall. But I'd say, and basically how hard it is to strip yourselves of those things, even if you might want to. And then lastly, the Thin Blood is basically a perspective of how even in the Sabbat, they are kind of the bottom of the totem pole. This whole like clanless thing does not apply to them. Like, it kind of applies to the Caitiff. The Caitiff get the better end of the deal on that end. But as far as everyone's concerned, Thin Blood aren't even really vampires. So Antitribu, if they try to kind of claim Antitribu status, that's not really going to fly. Like, everyone's still going to look at them askance. And basically how there's no upside for them in these vampire communities. As I said, the Path of the Sun is kind of it's not looked down upon, I wouldn't say, in this Sabbat, but it's definitely kind of only a path. It's a path only Thin Bloods can really make use of, because of their diminished beast, and because of the fact that their struggles with the curse are not as strong as a regular vampires, and so they don't necessarily need a path that's as ideologically rigorous. So in some ways, they're kind of still on humanity when on Path of the Sun, and that's the way it's portrayed in this book. And that those on the Path of the Sun very quick, even the Thin Bloods on Path of the Sun, start to disintegrate, start to diminish, and that the Path of the Sun itself is basically a very self-destructive path in and of itself. So it's not really teaching you to preserve yourself. So this point of view doesn't really get into that. It does mention the Path of the Sun, kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way, but in a way of someone who doesn't fully understand how the paths work. This is obviously a very young Thin Blood vampire, as most of them are, and so they're not fully immersed in like the strictures of the Sabbat, and the fact that they're not, like, as it says, on a path, makes their kind of, not necessarily alienation, but their ignorance of everything felt more keenly by them. And so even they mention the Path of the Sun in a kind of lighthearted way, and that Um, Basically, you die and then you die again, and hopefully that's the end of it. You know, like when they died, they thought it was over, but then they came back as a vampire, and things are even shittier than when they were alive somehow. And now, basically, the Sabbat is making them all these promises that they don't really 100% believe in, but they're gonna like tough it out. And then if you die again as a vampire, then it's over, or is something worse waiting for you? And that's kind of an interesting perspective. All right, so that was a lot, and I'm glad I hopped on to finish off the Antitribu section of the videos and streaming. Hopefully, next time we can get into, I guess, the Rite and all that. We can chat a little bit about it, about Rite and the rest. I can chat about it, or maybe I'll go and I guess Sabbat packs. There we go. So I can talk about the Sabbat pack types, the mechanical stuff about arena and all the arena traits, rove, grasp, clout, and all that. I'd say we're about a third of the way through the book, and so on. And I look forward to continuing these videos and answering more questions. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for stopping by, and I will see you next time. All right. Yes. Well, thanks for listening, Gord Whisperer. I appreciate it. Yeah, and obviously, I think the Antitribu is a very interesting wrinkle of the Sabbat. Even if the dogma is we're all clanless now, that's a lot easier said than done. And as always, pray